Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of KammaKast. We have a really interesting episode for you coming up. We have Bella Landymore, Joint Interim CEO of the Impact Investing Institute, coming to tell us a little bit more about her background and the interesting work that they're doing there. The Impact Investing Institute is a non-profit organisation dedicated to raising awareness of and addressing barriers to and increasing confidence in investing with impact. Bella's far better qualified to fill us in a little bit more about that. So Bella, can you tell us a little bit more about how this whole area of impact investing is really top of mind? It's a huge growth area, which makes me really happy, given kind of where my heart lies and what the direction of travel that we want to see. I'm a firm believer that once we get the kind of private investment running in the right direction towards impact, that has this tipping point for everything else where kind of impact and sustainability is concerned, and these kind of areas that we're focused on. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own background, how you've ended up at the institute, and the kind of more current work that you're doing there at the moment.
Sure. So, like you said, the Impact Investing Institute exists to grow the market for impact investing. But why? As you also implied, we want capital markets to be fairer and work better for people and planet. That's the big goal, that the whole system is working towards a more sustainable future. And I guess I am a cliche of the millennial generation, where I wanted a job that had some sort of greater purpose to it.
High five, me too.
I can't, and perhaps you would agree, I can't be claiming to save lives on a daily basis. You know, we are a million miles away in many ways from the impact that's happening on the ground, but my interest is in systems change and systems thinking and the undeniable power of the capital markets, and ultimately what they're investing in is the real economy and is having that impact on lives. And if we can play a small but hopefully a large part in influencing those capital markets, we can have a huge impact. So that's the driver behind why I'm in this space. I followed a fairly, well, maybe now it looks like it makes sense, but at the time it was a sort of roundabout way of getting here. I did a theology degree, which made me qualified for absolutely nothing. And then I joined the nonprofit sector looking for that purpose. I didn't find it. I did a grad scheme that landed me on the trading floor of an investment bank in New York. So I went from charity to trading floor overnight.
That's just like, you know, you meet people with like varying backgrounds. I think you kind of topped the pole for me with that. I think it's very impressive to go from a theology degree into getting into on a trading floor in New York. It's very hard to get those jobs, and like you clearly did nothing to do with it beforehand.
No, exactly.
So you must be very bright.
Well, it's kind of a luck of the draw. It was as with all these things, it was a luck of the draw, and it was a huge shock in every single way. But what it did make me realize, which I had no exposure to before, was, like I said, the power of capital markets. And I learned a bit more about where they intersect or don't intersect with things that I cared about. And so I left investment banking because I was also really disillusioned with the culture and knew that there was a space that I could move into where the financial markets did intersect with things I cared about. And that took me into government initially to work on impact investing policy. But then through government, I ended up having the privilege of helping set up the Impact Investing Institute and working for it for the last 4 years.
Wow. So how did the Impact Investing Institute end up getting set up? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So the government commissioned a task force on social impact investing in, I think, 2017. And that task force was looking to answer the question, how can we build a culture of social impact investing in the UK? And this was really off the back of a very strong and pioneering history in the UK of social investment. And you might remember David Cameron's Big Society agenda. And there was a lot around bringing private finance into that discussion around social impact and starting to try and create more linkages between the social sector and social organizations and the role of private finance in supporting those organizations and generating sustainable returns. But it was contained to social enterprises and charities and smaller organizations and sort of smaller finance, if you like, for a while. With the growth of sustainable investing, there became the question, well, what's the role for mainstream finance here? What's the role for the likes of your and my pension funds in investing in ways that create a more sustainable future? And so that task force in 2017 asked that question, and it appointed Dame Elizabeth Cawley as its chair. And she brought together a huge range of stakeholders across sectors to look at all the different barriers and potential opportunities that the question posed. They did such a sort of significant amount of work actually under a working group. They became a task force, and then at the end of the task force, having identified all sorts of barriers and started to work on the solutions, they really felt that the work, they wanted to see the work continue, and so received government endorsement as well as endorsement from a wide range of stakeholders to set up the institute, the Impact Investing Institute. And my role was in supporting that working group and that task force whilst in government, and therefore having the privilege to help Elizabeth and her stakeholders set up the Impact Investing Institute. So it had that government backing, it had that government support, but as with government task forces and working groups, it was actually the range of stakeholders from across sectors that they managed to bring together in that working group and task force that provided that platform for the future of the Institute and the strengths of support for the Institute. And that's what we've benefited from so greatly since then.
It's great to kind of see, particularly on such an important issue, that these working groups and task forces actually go somewhere, that they don't just get disbanded and like all the good work just sits there. So that kind of really does warm my heart and kind of restore my faith a bit in some of these things that you exist. So what kind of work have you been doing since setting up the Institute?
So we want to address the why for impact investing, if you like, which is thankfully becoming a lot easier to explain and also to attract kind of belief in and endorsement of. But that was a huge driver, just explaining the rationale, the very point of, and what impact investing is. So we've done a lot of awareness raising and myth busting around impact investing. Then we also do a lot of the what. So what are we talking about here? What are the examples of impact investing? What's the good practice? What can we show as case studies to inspire others to follow suit? And then the how. We actually have a number of practical projects which help investors and others do impact investing to move the money into impact. Currently, 2 of those flagship projects, we have our Just Transition Finance Challenge. So that's a coalition of 21 investors, asset owners and asset managers designing criteria for what a just transition fund looks like. So it's a really practical framework which provides a blueprint essentially for how a fund manager can design a fund that has integrity in its just transition ambitions and gets it some way in measuring and reporting on the impact it's having. And then another practical project of ours is in our place-based impact investing program. So that's about how to attract money into underinvested places in the UK, moving that money into places that doesn't have it for social and environmental benefit. And we've been working with Wakefield Council to help them identify opportunities in their area that could qualify as investment opportunities, and then working with them to develop those investments into opportunities that would speak to investors. And then the next stage is doing a little bit of that matchmaking, getting investors interested, bringing them to the table, thrashing out how those investment opportunities could be actually sort of brought to fruition and attract institutional capital.
Fascinating. So because I know like it's such a big problem to solve with all of this, and like we often suffer with this as well, is that where do you focus? Who do you try and focus on first? to because you can't focus on everybody, and I guess you're all about impact. So where do you get the best bang for your buck? So kind of what markets or what kind of stakeholders are you kind of focused on initially in this journey to try and explain that why and how?
Mm-hmm. So sort of divide it into two buckets. First of all, which stakeholders are we targeting, or for want of a better word, sort of looking to bring into the fold? And we prioritized pension schemes initially because of the size of the prize. Pension funds are the largest institutional investors in the UK and globally.
You're bang for your buck there.
Bang for your buck, right?
Literally.
But also, literally, but also that's people's money, and we know people care. People care about their money going to places, to people, and to causes that they care about. And so pensions have that dual purpose and dual opportunity. So we worked on connecting with the pensions industry, on identifying some of the barriers that they faced to doing impact investing. For example, the common myth that impact investing doesn't make a financial return. It's not true. There is evidence to the contrary. But because there's that wide held belief that it somehow means that you have to sacrifice financial returns, that it's philanthropy of some shape or form, pension schemes don't think that that's within their duties. They don't exist to make the world a better place. They exist to pay pensions to their members. And so we did a lot of work to put forward the evidence base and to put forward the legal argument that would reassure pension schemes that they can do this. And then we produced really practical guidance and tools and case studies and workshops to bring pension schemes together to discuss these issues, to follow sort of a set of principles. We have principles for pensions doing impact investing to empower them to begin to consider how to incorporate impact into their investment decisions. So we took that approach with pension schemes. We then moved into endowments. It's a smaller prize, but it's also quite a kind of easier prize, if I may say, just because charitable endowments, they already have that purpose through their foundation to make the world a better place. And so it's arguably a kind of easier sell to bring the giving side of the foundation, the sort of purpose of their philanthropic activities in line with their investment activities. So again, we followed a very similar approach to pension schemes, understanding what the barriers were and then putting together really tailored training and education solutions for that stakeholder group. So that's how we work through the target audiences. And then we identify themes that resonate. And I already referenced our two key themes. But the thing that pulls them together, the just transition and place-based, is actually a real focus on the social, on the S in ESG. And that's always been a kind of big focus of ours. A theme running through everything we've done is this idea that social can't be ignored. It's absolutely integral to the environmental piece. The one goes hand in hand with the other, and we're at risk of creating more risks down the line if we don't recognize the social impacts of climate change and the social opportunities of moving to a net zero economy. And that's sort of the definition, if you like, of a just transition. But that's also obviously so important when we're talking about places and the things within communities that make them good places to live and offer jobs and security.
Sorry, I'm about to cough. I think that's really powerful what you've just described. And I think until you're in this world and you realize that it's quite a big long journey, that I think hopefully in 10 years time people will look back and go, all this stuff is a no-brainer. But this whole kind of educational piece around taking these huge influential stakeholders like the pension funds and the endowments on this journey, it's easier said than done, right? You feel like everybody should know this intuitively because this is kind of what we do, and we think it's a bit of a no-brainer. But I know that that's not easy, because that's what we've kind of been doing a lot in our own markets to try and bring them along, to not even selling, but just help them understand that there is this is the direction of travel. There are big returns to be made for this, but you just have to be smart enough and brave enough to kind of see that and start making those changes now. In terms of your why, when you're talking to these institutions, what do you find are the one or two whys or the real hooks that where you suddenly see that aha moment or their ears prick up and you get that real buy-in to kind of jump on the bandwagon with you?
That's a good question. It really, to give an annoying answer, it really does differ depending on the stakeholder group. But that's also exactly to your point why it's a difficult endeavor, because in order to bring people on board, you have to understand where they're coming from. And so that requires a really individual approach. It's not a blanket message that's going to resonate with everybody. So for pension funds, it's going to be around the returns opportunity, or it's going to be around the financial and risk mitigation arguments, if you like. So the power that impact investments play, or the role they play in the diversification of a pension fund, and some of the risk mitigation that impactful and potentially long-term private assets have, long-term assets with sustainable credentials have. It's about demonstrating the art of the possible. Pension schemes are very conservative, and so they won't go where others have not gone before. So it's surfacing examples where others have gone there and why they've gone there and what the benefits have been. And there's also a regulatory, that it's the difference between carrot and stick, right? There's the stick piece, which is the regulatory tailwinds are really behind this. And we've just seen an absolute raft of regulation, haven't we, in the last 18 months to 2 years, not specifically related to impact, but related to sustainability. And increasingly, we're seeing, I think, a move towards what we would think of as the kind of reasons behind, or the good reasons behind, thinking about impact, the sort of systems thinking, that it's not just about the outside in impacts on your bottom line of environmental, social and governance factors, but it's also the role you as an institutional investor have on society through your investments, that concept of universal ownership, that you don't just own a part of the market, you own a part of the economy, and the way in which you invest has an impact on the economy. And if you take a long-term view as a pension fund, which in most cases you do, then what goes around comes around. And that idea of, it's called, the term double materiality and dynamic materiality is starting to catch on, but that idea that the way you invest is going to ultimately, or can ultimately, affect your financial returns in the long term.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I might actually use that myself. I wasn't familiar with those phrases before, but yeah, it's quite, it does make a lot of sense, right? Isn't it? It is a long-term view, but there is momentum that builds when you do reach that tipping point where people all start thinking in the same way. So, Bella, do you find that you're able to draw on your experience from when you worked at UPS in the trading department? Does it help you in any of these conversations? Does it inform kind of any of your thoughts and strategies and policies, or is it just kind of one of those things that is a little bit helpful and gives context, or is it actually kind of useful day to day?
It's a good question, because I think I use my experience in the financial services to, I think, rightly, bolster my kind of my confidence, I guess, in interacting with people within the financial services. And I think if it taught me anything, it was mostly about how to navigate the language and the way in which the world is structured. It's so complex. You have an investment bank, then you have an asset manager, then you have a wealth manager, you might have, you have trading desks and research, and how do they fit in with asset owners versus, the fund managers? The investment consultants, it's such a complex world that I think that time definitely helped me feel familiar with and be able to navigate it.
Yeah.
So yes, but I think I've also just learned a huge amount since then, and actually seeing government was incredibly helpful, because you get a real helicopter view of everything in government. And so it was in that position that I was able to really see how so many different stakeholders fit together across the value chain and where their interests lay.
Yeah, I can imagine that was probably the more pertinent question, and being able to have that insight of even how government works as well. That can't be but helpful. I could definitely identify what you're saying, because I started my career not working as a banker, but working with EY. I used to audit banks, and then I worked for the Central Bank of Ireland during the credit crisis. So it was an area I thought I'd never use again once I moved away from it. And like, strangely, now we've ended up working with banks, and actually all that language, all my kind of understanding of kind of how credit risk works and things like that is coming into this whole climate change transition risk area as well. So it's just so funny you never know how things are going to come back to help you or haunt you. I don't know.
No, exactly. Yeah. And actually, one of the anecdotes I use is that, one of the reasons I did theology and I went into the nonprofit sector was because I didn't want to be like my dad. My dad had always worked in financial services, and I was like, that is not my thing. I'm humanities. I'm about saving the world, or whatever it might be. And the irony that I ended up in in the finance space. And what was really funny was that he was an old school, he cut his teeth in the 80s in the financial services, and he moved from traditional investing, if you like, and he ended up running a food and agriculture fund, a sustainable impact food and agriculture fund. So whilst I was sort of ended up on the trading floor of an investment bank with no sustainability credentials, having thought that I was going to save the world, my dad was moving into impact investing. And now
how did this happen?
And what I think it's actually proof of for me is the growth of impact investing, the mainstreaming of impact investing, right? Like, my dad didn't set out to save the world through finance, but it was a good opportunity for him, and it was the way in which his career was going. And he ended up in this space.
He wasn't necessarily doing it for the impact, but it made sense, which that is kind of, I guess, what we're trying to achieve as well. Where if you're not naturally driven that way, it'll just kind of, from a opportunity and a common sense point of view, that's kind of what you should end up doing. It would be great if that was the basis for everything.
I don't want to paint my dad as if he didn't want to have a positive impact on the world, but it was just I do like to use it as a proof point that this is going mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, funnily enough, I went to the theatre last night to see the Lehman trilogy, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it's actually excellent.
Yeah. I went with my dad.
There you go. I really enjoyed it, but our conversation today is making me think of that, because just that evolution of how brokerages came about and how commodity markets evolved into trading, and hopefully this whole area of impact investing and that virtuous circle, that hopefully the power and might of private finance going in this direction kind of starts to happen, that's the next chapter in some of this as well. And kind of on that note, so you did mention the Just Transition Finance Challenge. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So this was work that was sparked by another task force that we co-chaired with the Global Steering Group on Impact Investing under the auspices of the UK's leadership of the G7 in 2021. And it was looking at how to mobilize capital towards a just transition. Just transition being that interaction that I described between the environmental and the social, that we need to move to a net zero economy in a fair and socially inclusive way. What's the point of mitigating climate change if it's not for people ultimately? But it often feels like there's a very myopic focus on reducing carbon and counting carbon at the kind of expense of other interrelating factors, the obvious ones being nature and people. And of course, the just transition, this concept that the transition to a net zero economy needs to be just and fair, is also in recognition that that shift to a net zero economy is going to have a huge impact on humanity. It's going to change the way in which we work. It's going to change the way in which our communities are set up. It's changing our goods and services. It's also dependent on those people, and it's not going to happen unless we have public acceptance and buy-in. And we've seen Gilets jaunes recently and that backlash against climate action, but also we saw what happened when we retreated from the mining sector in the 80s and we left entire communities behind, and the devastation that can be caused to people's livelihoods when they are not brought along. So this is our raison d'etre for focusing on a just transition and for bringing it to investors' attention when they're thinking about their climate strategies. How can they integrate these social considerations, and how can they integrate people and their voices and their needs into their investment decisions? So to go back to the mini history, this task force focused on how to mobilize capital. It produced a fantastic report with the input of, I think, 170 people globally across 40 different countries. But it identified the problems and some of the potential solutions. And the challenge was to take that to action. To go back to what we do the why, the what, and the how. So the report was the why and the what, and the challenge is the how. How do we help people put their money towards these investments that are going to have a positive social and environmental impact? And so we initially thought, well, if we can just get a couple of investors on board, we might be able to create some sort of guidance or principles for how this might be done. In fact, we ended up attracting 20 major asset managers and asset owners who have a global footprint, and they range from household names like HSBC and Schroders to amazing impact investors like Leapfrog based in South Africa. And then we have asset owners like Nest Pension Fund, Scottish Widows, the Environment Agency, and they've collaborated with us to design these criteria. So it's a framework for how an investor can set a just transition strategy, and that includes the metrics that they would use in disclosing or identifying and disclosing potential negative impacts they're going to have, and importantly, the positive impacts they want to have across environment, social, and community voice. And then through that work, we've also had the opportunity to consult really broadly. So it's not just the work of 20 big financial players, which would make it sort of slightly perversely exclusive, because this is all about, again, justice and community voice and putting people at the center of climate action. So what we've done is consult really broadly across the NGO and social impact and sort of labor representation space to try and produce something that has integrity, essentially, and is useful to investors and asset owners. Anyway, we're publishing them in May. We, like I say, hope that they're really useful. That won't be the end of it. It's the beginning, in fact, because at that point we want them to be used. And so at this point and going forwards, we're developing relationships with fund managers and asset owners who are testing them out for us and going to create that feedback loop in terms of how they can serve a purpose going forwards.
That's really exciting and great to see you've got the ear of so many influential global players, because they can account for quite a large amount, sadly, of the wealth in the world. So the impact is definitely there. So really well done on that. That sounds fantastic. Would you mind telling us a little bit, because there was the two tenets to kind of your focus that you spoke about. There's also the place-based impact investing program. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Sure. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the focus of this program, if you think of just transitions as a kind of horizontal, it's a theme. The work that we've done is agnostic of asset class and geography. It's putting meat on the bones of a concept that's actually, it's not ours at all. It's been around for years. It grew out of a labour movement, but what we wanted to do was explain what it meant for investors. Yeah. So we don't want to give the impression that it's the space that we own.
Taking credit for it.
Yes. We've inherited it, and we're trying to give it, justice in the context of investment decisions. But that's our cross-cutting thematic. What does that mean in particular places for particular people? And that's our place-based work. So it's focused on the UK. It's focused on mobilizing institutional capital, big pools of capital, into places that need it. These are traditionally underinvested. They're underinvested because they don't appear attractive to investors, therefore they don't attract investment, therefore their outcomes worsen, and it's a vicious downward cycle. We started the work focused on local government pension schemes because in the UK, they're quite a unique pool of capital in that the people contributing to local government pension schemes are working for the public sector in a particular place. An example being South Yorkshire Pension Fund. These are people who have lived and worked in South Yorkshire all their lives. And so they're contributing into a pot. Should that pot not potentially be reinvesting in that place? So that was the initial focus of our work, acknowledging that, we don't want all local government pension schemes just investing in their small regions for diversification reasons, etc. But they have that special purpose, and they have already, in many cases, been doing this in the UK and been investing in their places. And there are some great examples of investments in renewable energy that has a really significant impact on local communities in a positive way, that have really taken into account the needs of local places and people. And the size of the prize is huge. I think the stat is, if 5% of local government pension schemes were to invest in their place, it would mobilise 16 billion of investment in the UK. So that was our starting point. And from there, we've grown that project to do a couple of other things in addition to engage with local government pension schemes. So I mentioned the first piece of work we did with Wakefield Council, but it's something we're looking to replicate, and it's essentially to create a demonstrator effect. What does it look like when you bring investment energy and capability and capacity to a place? What opportunities can you create in that place by bringing that perspective, if you like? And it's not to say that local places don't want to do it or can't do it. It's just that they have so many other priorities and they're so stretched, and they don't always have the resources to employ the kind of expertise that's needed when thinking about investment structuring and attracting investors to the table. So we're trying to kind of inject some of that capacity and capability and show what happens when that happens. So we are looking to replicate that with different areas. We've got another pilot lined up, but we don't, again, own this space, and we can't service every place in the UK. The idea is to create a blueprint for what can be achieved when this way of working is put in place.
Oh, that's great. And I also think as you say, in those places, once you kind of just provide a little bit of support and fill in some of the gaps where there might be a knowledge gap or a resource gap or a skill gap, people are generally kind of passionate about their local area. So it kind of, once you kind of give them that helping hand, that usually momentum does take place, or hopefully it will. So I think that's a fantastic initiative. So really well done on that as well. It's been really, really exciting and incredibly interesting, actually, listening to all the things that you're doing. And as it says on the tin, I think you are having a real genuine impact, definitely bang for your buck. So very grateful that an organization like Impact Institution exists, because you clearly do have influence. You've got the ear of some very big spenders across the world, and this is the type of stuff that we need if we are going to get to where we need to be with sustainability. So I find that really exciting, and glad that people like you exist, Bella. And it's been really great to learn. So thank you for sharing so much. We've definitely got some great insights there and snippets that I think will make for good, entertaining listening for our listeners. So thank you.
And we're very grateful that you want to listen to us and learn more about what we do. So thank you.
We will spread the word.
Fantastic.